We are now going to put together all that we've come across in the area of ethics and connect it to professional practice. We're going to do that because at this point we're really bridging between the two parts of this unit. The first part has to do with the theory of ethics, the history of ethics, the different ethical systems and so on. And from now on, we're going to be moving towards applying that in professional practice. This question of professional practice as a branch of ethics is very old and actually very familiar. And as we're going to see, it is very, very important when we think about what it is to be a professional. The American writer John Ruskin wrote a very interesting essay some time ago that is recommended that you read because it gets us to think about what it is that a person does in their day job, if you like, their vocation, which really earns them their place in society. And so I recommend that you read that. I won't say any more about it because otherwise I'll steal Ruskin's thunder. But I think Ruskin's essay is doubly appropriate in financial planning practice because part of the professional spectrum that Ruskin considers touches very close to the area of finance. He doesn't actually do it because in the 19th century when he was writing, there wasn't such a thing as a financial advisor. And for that matter, many of the modern professions relating to business and finance and so on really hadn't been invented. But I'll leave you to join the dots. It's a very interesting read, and I hope it also introduces you to the style that you find in intellectual writing from the 18th century. It has a different literary style to the way we write today, something which is not without considerable attractions just because of the literature of it. So John Ruskin, I recommend. There's a second reading which is actually done by somebody fairly close to home, which explores the questions of the meaning of professionalism, which is also recommended reading for this unit. And now we're going to look at what professionalism means. If we ask somebody what it is to be a professional, they will often say, well, a professional is somebody who earns a lot of money. In fact, in some cases, professional sport, for example, the difference between an amateur sportsman and a professional sportsman is that the professional gets paid. And so income has the association with being a professional. Bank robbers also earn, well, they're sort of keeping in front of the police, a good income, but we wouldn't call it a profession. And so income isn't necessarily aligned to the doings of a professional. And on the other extreme, you can have very professional people who may not make very much money. We could think of some examples if you like, but Fred Horrocks comes to mind, the eye doctor, who was an absolute master at his craft, but who devoted his time mainly to helping the poor people, and he didn't charge for it. So income really wasn't an aspect or a dimension of his professionalism. When we look down the list, we can say, well, it could be important service, because after all, a professional does something which is really important. That's true in most cases, and it's an indication there are probably some important things that people do. For instance, I think it's a very important service in my home to have the water connected. And so the man who comes along and turns on the meter at the gate or reads the meter, is he a professional? Well, maybe not, even though I'd probably die if I didn't have the water connected. So there are a lot of important things which aren't necessarily professional, but maybe we're getting close. And that gets us close to this issue of education and skill. Because you can say, well, it's not simply to be a plumber or the man who reads the meter who's the professional as far as the water service goes, but it might be the engineer who designs the water supply for the city, something like that. And this question of skill and education is certainly important. I've alluded before with talking about Ruskin, about the importance of trust. I would not think my doctor very professional if I could not trust him. I go along to the doctor when I'm ill, or I'm not sure if I'm ill, or what have you, and I trust him to know more about what makes me well than I do. But I really don't understand all of the things that he has learnt and has mastered, and so I have to trust him. This is an important area. Another dimension, which is often pointed to when people ask what does it take to become a professional, is the importance of self-regulation. This, oddly enough, is connected to trust. And the reason is that if the community must trust, let's say, the doctor, then it means that the community doesn't have the skills to be able to know when the doctor is doing good work as a doctor or when he's doing bad work. And so it really means that you need another doctor to be able to test the skill, the quality of the professional. So self-regulation tends to be the result of all of that process. The Australian Medical Association, the AMA, is the best equipped body in Australia to determine good doctors from bad doctors. Whereas in the case of, let's say, go back to plumbers, we can get people skilled in the business of checking plumbers. And in fact, the average person can look at their tap, see that it's not dripping and say, well, isn't this good? My plumber must know what he's doing. And when I go to use the bathroom and, everything sort of flows away as it should down the sewer, I can also say, well, my plumber definitely has done what he's supposed to do because I don't have block pipes all the time and everything works. So I don't need to know anything about plumbing apart from the fact that the taps don't drip and the water flows away down the little plug hole. And I'm happy. I know exactly what makes a good plumber. And so to a certain extent, you don't need to have plumbers checking up on plumbers. It might be useful in some cases, but by and large the community can make that decision. And the final dimension is the matter of ethics, because one of the distinguishing things about genuine professions is that they all will have a code of ethics, some more detailed than others, some focusing on some things more than others, whereas other jobs, even well-paid jobs, for instance, I might make a lot of money as an opera singer. Do I have to have a code of ethics to be a professional opera singer? Well, I don't think such a thing exists. I don't know if I'd even really bother sort of calling a singer who makes a lot of money a professional. Some of them are positive rogues, and you certainly wouldn't want your kids to have anything to do with them. However, they do make a lot of money, they provide an important service, they have certain skill that I don't have, to be an opera singer or a rock and roll singer or something. Trust, well, it's an interesting question. Self-regulation, not necessary, and so on. And so we can use some of the examples of some occupations as a way of understanding what makes a profession. And we really say that all of these aspects go towards what you expect in a professional. What we are going to do now is go through those different dimensions of professionalism and see how important they are, how relevant they are, and hopefully we'll get to a conclusion as to which one is really important. We've briefly looked at the importance of skill in education. One of the curious things about most of the skills that we need in a profession or any occupation is that they don't necessarily come through a particular institution. However, in recent times, professional occupations tend to be associated with university degrees. This hasn't always been the case. And so what I want to do is look at how important this professional, or how important university education is, or high-level education really is, especially when we've got this problem that it appears that what you need to do in a job may not necessarily require everything that you learn at some educational institution. In fact, a lot of it might have been able to be taught at a lower level, say at a TAFE level or whatever. So I got this question, if you like, of the importance of professional skill.
The important thing about a professional is that they're expected to understand a lot more than merely what is needed for the next job they're likely to do, or even the jobs they're likely to do in the next 5 years. True professionals are intended to have an education that runs a lot deeper than simply their immediate job. And this extends not simply in the technical area, say in an understanding of property for property economists, but also into a wider education to understand their place in the larger community. And generally, professionals are called upon to have more educated opinions on larger issues, say to do with the operation of the economy or even in politics. Today, most professions demand at least a university degree as a benchmark for entry. This does not mean that genuine professionals and well-qualified people capable of performing all of the duties we've discussed so far can't be achieved without a university education. And if we look back in history, we find it wasn't a long time ago that accountants and property people, and in fact even engineers, if we go back far enough, did not go to university. Some of the best of them came out of TAFE. However, they added to their technical education, practical education in the field, usually in a form of apprenticeship or articles, which is a form of professional education or professional apprenticeship, but also the strength of a long period of professional experience before being fully recognised. And so while the university degree has become the norm, it's not the only way for a person to get the kind of total education and background understanding of the world and the place of their craft in it that really befits a professional. Today there is a lot of emphasis on the pace of change in the professional world, and especially any profession which has some kind of connection with the law. Property economics certainly has this. And so for this reason, continuing professional education is particularly important. It's up to the individual to assess the actual value of particular continuing professional education activities. But one of the spin-offs of continuing professional education is that it helps to maintain a network operating between professionals or members of a profession. And so if you go along to a conference or some other training event or educational event, part of the learning can be just speaking to other people that are participating. And it's very important for professionals to consider very seriously becoming a very active part of the local profession in the region that they're operating. Overall, it's expected that professionals have an understanding which is not merely sufficient for their technical exercise of their work, but really an understanding at the edge of the discipline. And this means as new approaches become available or new questions are asked and answered, local professionals should be equipping themselves with this latest knowledge. This is one of the functions of continuing professional education. In former days it was assumed that professionals would take this on simply because of their enthusiasm, their passion for their craft. Now, while the notions of enthusiasm and passion are partly being drained out of our culture, it's still important that in some way this kind of enthusiasm for one's vocation, partly motivated by your relationship or your understanding of your relationship with the community. The flip side of this is that professionals undertake to contribute in some way, where appropriate, to knowledge growth in their professional area. As you go through your professional lives, it's likely that you may find yourself working on new and leading edge activities within the profession. And it then becomes important for the community of the property economics professionals that your new insights coming from your particular experiences are made available to your fellows. And this is where things like the Australian Property Journal, or as it's now known, the Australian New Zealand Property Journal, is very, very important to keep up with. Even if you're not narrowly employed in the area of valuation, it's an opportunity to see what new contributions to knowledge are coming from your fellow professionals. And also it's important for you to consider, maybe not immediately on graduation, but certainly before you retire, to have at least as one goal to perhaps publish a paper in the Australian Property Journal, or at least some other equivalent form. You find this also in other forms of professional participation, not just in publishing in professional journals, but also at presentations, at conferences, as well as participation. One exciting aspect of becoming a professional is realising that you're reaching pretty much the top of the tree when it comes to understanding in your discipline. And this means that the gap between the teachers and the learners tends to narrow. This is not to say that when you do undergraduate property, the gap is so narrow that the students can take over the role of the teachers. But rather, when you're out with 5 or 10 years experience, you could well find yourself coming back to give guest classes to new and upcoming hopeful members of the profession. If we move now to looking at professional income, we've seen that professionals earn higher incomes than other crafts and trades. However, why should this be the case? Is it that the professionals deserve a higher income, or is it that the incomes cause people to be professional? What this means is that we need some theory of merit or worth. There must be some way of being able to justify, ethically perhaps, or at least before the community, that the professional does deserve this higher income. The philosopher Foucault was of the opinion that the higher income that professionals earn was merely the result of the fact that they do have superior income, and as a result they're able to exercise power over the community, a form of extortion. Now this is a very unsavoury theory of professional income. However, on the other hand, it can be seen that because you need a higher income, it does justify in some way sufficient income to be able to support the education that a professional needs, and also the time for additional professional development. And so there is this merit to having an income, because it means that you give your professionals the resources in order to stay at the head of their game and contribute to the development of it. And so in this way, there is a kind of two-way causal relationship between professional income and professional service to the community. The old concept of leisure should be considered here. We normally think of leisure as goofing off, as being able to just have time when you're absolutely doing nothing useful. But in fact, leisure is a concept which is actually associated with learning and with development of an understanding of things greater than the immediate. And this notion of being able to study and having the leisure to study is very important, because it enables people to do things, to study things beyond what they need for their next job. And remember, this is the way we described the work of the professional and the type of education that a professional needs. Another element in the puzzle of professional income is to recognise that high income does not equal professionalism. Just because I might earn a large income, it doesn't mean that the work I do has the qualities of being a professional. If I am a professional actor or a professional singer, it doesn't require some ethical relationship with the community. It's simply because my skills are in such short supply that I can do what Foucault was complaining about, and that is use my monopoly power because of my single control of my unique skills to be able to extort a very high income from the community. And there are other cases where individuals are able, one way or another, to exact a high income from what they do, even without being dishonest. However, their activities are not necessarily professional, or at least not professional in the true sense of the word. And so what we find as we come to the end of looking at professional income is that there is this difficulty with the notion of income. On one sense, it is deserved because of the high value of the work that professionals do for the community. It's also necessary because professionals need the resources to be able to educate themselves and maintain themselves at the edge of their skill set. They also need to have sufficient income to be insulated from the temptation to skim in their professional practice. And this is something that needs to be considered fairly subtly. If professionals are governed purely by market forces, it means that they would be tempted to reduce the quality of their work to the barest minimum necessary in order to fulfill their obligations or the expectations of their clients. However, if clients are not able to judge the quality of the work, it means that professionals could skim in terms of the resources they put into their work and still take away their professional incomes. What this means is that generally, if professional incomes are competed too far down as a result of market forces, there becomes an unfair burden or temptation on the part of professionals to actually perform their work at less than a professional level, because after all, no one but another professional would be able to catch them out. Overall, our community is still grappling with this problem of whether professionals really do earn their income and to what extent they should be accountable to the market, as opposed to some other mechanism for setting professional incomes. Ultimately, this question of income comes back to what is becoming a chorus in our examination of professionalism, and that is the dimension of ethics, because one way or another, a professional has the power, as Foucault complained, to be able to extort the community if they wish. But we would rather hope that genuine professionals would be sufficiently ethical not to do this. If the question of professional income gives way to ultimately a relatively simple ethical dilemma, we find that it's also reflected in the quality of professionals who tend to be organised as a result of self-regulation. Trades and arts which do not need to approach the community as a result of trust, such as the mechanics and the plumbers we've been talking about, do not need self-regulation because the community is quite able and capable of regulating and setting the quality standards of those crafts. However, it's only another professional that is able to gauge the quality of a professional's work. And what this means is that ultimately regulation of professional quality has to be left to the professionals themselves, or at least their organisations. And this is why professional institutes are so important amongst the professions, such as the Australian Property Institute or the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. Unfortunately, relying on professional institutes still leaves us with the difficulty of who we can trust. Can the community trust professional bodies? Today, if we look around the property professions, we find that while there are professional institutes such as the API and the RICS, we also find that there are other groups that purport to represent the industry, and these can be referred to as lobby groups. They are often heavily funded by particular parts of the property industry, and their primary purpose is to produce opinions and other influential matter, either for the media or for politicians or other decision makers, that are going to further the commercial interests of the people that fund them and support them. There's not a lot of point in specifying which groups we might be referring to here, but it's up to the students to be able to identify them. And what we find is that these bodies, which often purport to approach the community representing the professional community are in fact pushing a particular view for the development of the interests of that sector of the industry that is supported by that view. This produces what we could call a cheap professionalism, and unfortunately the balance between lobby groups versus genuine professional institutions has a large bearing on how the public ultimately perceives a particular body. We've seen how professional ethics keep coming up over and over again, even though we might be discussing different attributes or dimensions of professionalism that at first do not appear to have an ethical foundation. What we need, therefore, is to be able to understand better than other crafts and trades in the community what is the stuff of ethics. We'll begin by simply looking at the quality of ethics as a priority for the other. One way or another, it's related to trust, or the confidence of the community, and it's the confidence that the other is not suiting themselves. If I meet you in some relationship, it's up to you to be confident that I'm not going to be working to suit my selfish desires, which means that I'll be putting you second when I make some decision that you're not aware of or perhaps don't have the power to. If I'm a professional serving you as my client, you have to be able to trust that you can rely on me to suit your interests and the interests of the community, even when it may put constraints upon me and my self-interests. And this is the very core of ethics. What we need to do is require an exploration of the meaning of ethics, because our culture generally avoids discussion on ethics, and it tends to find it easier to leave it to the individual, leaving everybody to be able to assert quite comfortably that they have their own ethics and they are ethical people. However, if ethics has to do with the confidence that the other is not suiting themselves, then the idea of having an ethic as something that the individual decides for themselves privately, then that is the one thing that we can conclude definitely cannot be ethical.
So hopefully now we can come to a final summary of what we've seen with professional ethics and the importance of it for professionalism. What we've seen is that the professions represent a relationship between an occupational group and the community, and one which is particular because the professional is able to, one way or another, take advantage of the community simply because of their professional expertise. And so the important thing about professions is the necessity for trust. And as we've outlined, trust is something which is necessary in a professional relationship far more than with other occupations. That's, I think, probably the most important thing. Ultimately, trust is not something that you can mandate by some sort of government regulation.
Trust is not something that you can mandate or rely on a statement of professional ethics from your professional association, FASIA or whatever. In the real world, you can make a lot of money by abusing trust, and there's no shortage of examples of that. And for some people, they do a business plan that involves basically abusing the trust that the community places in them because they are a professional. Their work cannot be understood fully by their clients, by the community. And they figure on the likelihood of being able to make enough money and being able to get out before the government or their professional association catches up with them. And so this is a practical decision. But it's really the practical decision of a thief, even though you might be able to get away with it, and maybe you might be in an environment where everyone else is playing the same game. However, once you take the view of your occupation in that sense, you have really stopped being a profession. And once it becomes apparent that you, as let's say a doctor, is likely to be practicing with a certain degree of negligence, or maybe the best interest of your next of kin and sort of giving you an injection that you won't recover from, or as a financial advisor, giving advice which maybe benefits the advisor's pocket more than their client. Or perhaps it's just plain negligent because you're making a lot of money out of your fees and you really couldn't be bothered wasting the time doing the homework that you're expected to do as a profession. There are a million ways of abusing trust. But unfortunately, the community needs trust in order to be a society. It is possible to have a community, a society, degenerate to the point where nobody trusts anyone, and life can go on in that situation, and we have historical examples of it. In Europe, the best historical example is the Dark Ages, where the political organisation of Rome became so unreliable. The Roman emperors were too busy assassinating each other and involving themselves in orgies and all sorts of other things, that at the time went from being unethical to, well, being so common that a sociologist would say that they were normal. But the wheels fell off the entire civilization. We went into a period where Rome for hundreds of years couldn't even make the mortar to stick its own bricks together, so they couldn't build anything. It gives you an idea of where the demise of trust can lead a group. You also find other examples closer to home amongst indigenous communities that give up their traditional ethics, if you like, their traditional laws and customs as they describe them, and really become very unpleasant groups, if you like, to have very much to do with. And there are a number of examples of that we could cite, but I'll leave you to look into yourself. What I'm saying here, and what is being illustrated, is that trust is the glue for society. And once a society abandons trust, then while it can certainly endure, but it will not flourish. One of the advantages of the colonisation, if we can call it that, of Papua New Guinea was the introduction of what were known in New Guinea as government officers. And the government officers' job were to travel about the highlands from community to community, making sure that the different tribes didn't do unpleasant things to each other. And one of the things that became apparent very early in that program was that all of a sudden the tribes were able to be far more productive. And the reason for that is that the Highlander tribes used to be very aggressive and very isolationist, if you like, and they would make war with each other, they would fight with each other, they would practice cannibalism against each other. And so what it meant was that if you went out to do a day's farming, gardening in the highlands of New Guinea, you had to have one man digging his garden, while next to him stood another man armed to fight off any invasion from the neighbouring tribes. So you really halved your workforce. That was purely the result of the lack of trust. The trust that was introduced as a result of the presence of white men, government officers, who would come through and treat misbehaviour, let's say eating your neighbours, as something very bad. And so trust was forced into the community, perhaps against their traditions and customs, but certainly they appreciated the civilizing influence. And we can draw these instances into observations about where our community would go if we weren't able to trust our professionals. We don't have that issue with other occupations.
That's unfortunate, though, because in a sense the community is expecting something of its professionals. It's expecting to be able to rely on them to be trustworthy. We have the issue of income, which we've seen is appropriate for professionals to have a higher income, not merely because of their power over the community, but rather as part of an interaction between them and the community, where the extra work, the extra education, the extra intellectual input is recognised and respected, and it's rewarded with that income which comes from the education, the risk-taking and things like that that are associated. So the income setting, while you can't set it using market forces, there is something else going on, which is really this ethical relationship between the community. The community has an obligation to care for its professionals, and so provide for them at a higher standard of living perhaps than the average person who's cleaning the streets or something. But on the other hand, the professional has an obligation, and in neither direction can it be set by external forces, either by market forces or by the state. So it comes down to this question of ethics, and here we are almost going round in circles with ethics. In the extension presentation, we're going to explore in greater detail exactly what ethics are. For now, we're not going to sort of go into that because it's really quite a different topic, but one way or another it has to do with this very important quality that goes right to the fundamentals of what makes society, and that is the free will decision to act in a way which benefits the other in a relationship. Professionals have a wonderful opportunity to live that principle of willing the good of the other, and in fact we expect that. You can go into the local cafe and order a cup of coffee. You expect certain quality, and while you can certainly have recourse to legal help in the case of someone serving you soup that's got, I don't know, body parts in it or something, one way or another there are a lot of places where people can treat you badly and you'll never know. But the ethical person, the ethical relationship, is where you don't have to worry about that, because for whatever reason, from somewhere within their standards that they live their own life by, they are freely choosing to choose your good rather than to use you for their benefit.